because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are. And we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cows in the Field. This is a movie podcast that aims to explore philosophical themes embedded in popular films. Slightly different.
Yeah,
Slightly
you mixed
different.
it up.
Today we're talking about the 1993 Wolfgang Petersen film In the Line of Fire. And we're joined by the one and only Bilge Ebiri, writer for New York Magazine and Vulture, and big-time Wolfgang Petersen fan. Welcome, Bilge.
Welcome.
Good to be here again.
Excellent. Welcome back, I should say. Welcome back. And this movie came out in 1993. So there's no, yes, there will be spoilers in our conversation, but for the members of the audience who are deciding at this point, do I want to watch In the Line of Fire? I've never seen it. I don't know. We want to start with a 10-second pitch for the movie. And because you're our guest, Vilga, I want to give you the first pass. Give us your 10-second pitch for In the Line of Fire.
Clint Eastwood plays a veteran Secret Service agent who was there the day John F. Kennedy died. And he discovers that there is an assassin trying to kill the current president. And not only is this person trying to kill the current president, he is also calling our hero to taunt him over the phone because of the fact that he is known as the Secret Service agent who lost the president.
Excellent.
Oh my gosh, so intriguing.
Yeah, it brings you right in. Laura, what's your pitch?
Okay. Mine would be, do you like 90s era thrillers set in DC? To which I would assume everybody would say yes, because everybody has to say yes. That's the best genre, right?
If you don't, you probably shouldn't watch this movie.
Right. Do you want one of the best, most charming, maybe, antagonists of all time, and also a really amazing score, and also a dash of JFK conspiracy Warren Report stuff? Yes, you do. You want to watch Line of Fire?
I like it. So I'm going to do mine. I'm going to model it after Bilge's. So John Malkovich plays the most charismatic, persuasive, tempting villain. And actually, in John Malkovich's, I would say I'm going to just say this. I haven't seen every John Malkovich movie, but I'm going to say this is my favorite John Malkovich performance. If you like Malkovich and any of that sounded intriguing, I would recommend In the Line of Fire.
It was his job to safeguard the destiny of a nation.
Today, America mourns the loss of President
But at the
John
critical
Fitzgerald.
moment, he was a split second too late. Now, after a lifetime of second thoughts and second guesses, Secret Service agent Frank Horrigan is about to get a second chance.
Yeah.
Frank Horrigan?
Yeah.
I've read about you, seen photos. You were JFK's favorite. Dallas. What happened to you that day?
And this time, he'll be ready.
I see you, Frank. I see you standing over the grave of another dead president.
That's not gonna happen.
Clint Eastwood. In the Line of Fire.
Bilge, you had suggested this movie to us. I think we had talked a little bit we were talking about Wolfgang Petersen, and I think I had thrown out Perfect Storm because I think Laura...
Love Perfect Storm.
Laura's a big Perfect Storm fan.
Great movie.
And we were chatting, and you said, but what about In the Line of Fire? And I wanted to just get your history with this movie. So, you've told me that off mic that it is your favorite Petersen, but I just want to know, when did you first see it, and when did you fall in love with it?
I fell in love with it the very first time I saw it, which was when it was in theaters. It's actually it is my favorite Wolfgang Petersen film, though admittedly Wolfgang Petersen has made a number of excellent films. it's also probably my favorite Clint Eastwood performance, actually. And I love Clint Eastwood. I mean, I grew up watching Clint Eastwood movies. Big admirer of many of his films as director and as star. It's like I kind of grew up with Clint Eastwood, like his journey from one type of actor to being another type of actor and to being another type of icon sort of coincides with me, growing up from being, a snot-nosed kid to, a thoughtful film critic or whatever. But and this film really moved me when I first saw it. I saw it. I think I saw it late in its run because it was coming out in theaters. It was a summer release. It was coming out in theaters right as I was leaving the country to go to Turkey, I believe. And then so I saw it kind of when I came back from Turkey. And back in the days when a movie would be in theaters for a couple of months. So if you missed it, a few weeks later you could catch up with it. This was an interesting time for Eastwood because he had just won the Oscars for Unforgiven, which had come out, the previous year. And that was a real resurgence for him. I mean, before that, there was a period when it looked like Clint Eastwood was kind of over. And so Unforgiven was like a shock to the system. And so this came right on the heels of that. And it was really quite, the turnaround in his career. Like it really felt like he had turned this corner where he had gone from being kind of macho action star, slowly aging, to a guy who sort of was like a repository of everything he had been, but was this kind of new figure, this figure of regret and melancholy and reflection. So in my mind, In the Line of Fire and Unforgiven are almost, they're like conjoined in a way. And then like the year later, or maybe even later this year, he I can't remember if A Perfect World is 94 or 93, but that comes soon thereafter, which is another great film, I think, which wasn't as big a hit. And then after that, I believe it's Bridges of Madison County, which I think is 95. So this is an incredible run for Eastwood. I mean, Eastwood didn't direct In the Line of Fire, but I think In the Line of Fire really fits within that continuum of Unforgiven, A Perfect World, Bridges of Madison County. And it's kind of this remarkable period when he's showing a kind of vulnerability that he's never shown before. And it's startling and deeply moving. And, I'll hear people talk about In the Line of Fire as, oh yeah, it's like Clint Eastwood Secret Service agent. Yeah, nice little movie, nice little action film, which like it's not more than a nice little action film. I think it's a great action film, and I think it's beautifully made, just excellent execution on all levels. But I think it's much more than that. And so I've become obsessed. I became obsessed with it, and had it on Laserdisc, had it on DVD. I have it on Blu-ray. I watch it at least once a year.
I mean, what's interesting about what you're saying, Bilge, is like, I mean, I wasn't conscious of Clint's career in 1992. I was 8, but I think someone could be forgiven for thinking in 1992. This is like a swan song kind of movie for Clint Eastwood. This is a capstone for his career. He's looking back. He's evaluating what he's done with older eyes, and he's got hindsight now, and he's in a position to really just like step back and reflect in a kind of somber way. And there's, as you put it, there's a lot of regret, but there's also a lot of like bitterness. Like he's an incredibly caustic character to all of his friends around him. He has to sort of come to grow a heart. And you might think like that's, metafictionally paralleling Clint Eastwood's career. He's had this extensive career being the guy who's the big action hero, so to speak. And now he's just deciding, he's transitioning. And you mentioned Bridges of Madison County. And yeah, I think that's a movie where you feel like, yeah, that's the kind of movie he's going to now make. Like that, he's just going to transition into this kind of quiet, period. And, but then much like the character he plays of Frank Horrigan, who's fighting against his age and all of the, everyone telling him you're too old for this job. You need to basically go into desk duty, go into management and stop being in the field. He defies all of them. He defies the odds. And the character does. And Clint Eastwood defies the odds. This now becomes a mid-career movie, which is
almost
unbelievable.
30 years old. Yeah, I mean, and this applies for Unforgiven too, because at the time it felt like this was late style, right? I mean, this was Clint Eastwood kind of wrapping things up, and, like the swan song period. 30 years ago, he's made like 25 movies since then.
Crazy.
And I mean, I assume he had no intentions of, retiring or dying anytime soon at the time. I mean,
Sure.
It was a few years ago when he like brought his mom to the Oscars, and, he was like 80 and she was like 90 or whatever. I mean, he has the genes to kind of keep going, and probably was aware of that at the time. But I do wonder if sometimes Clint Eastwood's like, God damn it, I made my old man movie like 30 years ago, and I keep making variations on it. It's just like, I really should have waited a little bit. Because he's just like, I can't really go back now.
But it's unbelievable that it is an old man movie, but it's also, he also is the action star of the movie. So it is like he's defying whatever the critics might have said or whatever. He's in there, running alongside the car.
Diving in front of bullets.
Exactly. But then, I said all this to Laura. I was like, this is interesting metafictional parallel. And then, Laura, you brought up Tom Cruise.
Oh, God.
I was going to actually mention Tom Cruise, but go ahead.
Go ahead, Laura.
What? She said Tom Cruise is 59 right now, and he looks great. And Clint Eastwood is supposed to be playing a 50-year-old in this movie, but he's 62 in this movie, and I feel like he looks like he's 85 in this movie.
but it's,
maybe I'm being really mean, or I'm just holding him to Tom Cruise standards.
But I guess the point is just that, okay,
what did you want me to say?
Clint Eastwood at this point, he's older, and you feel like, okay, this is kind of the end of the career. But with Tom Cruise at this point, we're thinking, I don't know, could he do this for 20 more years?
He could keep jumping off buildings.
Well, it is interesting. Tom Cruise, you're absolutely right. I mean, he is, I think, a couple of years younger than Clint Eastwood was when he made this movie, right?
Yeah,
Tom
he's
Cruise is
59 now. Yeah.
59, and Clint was 62 when he did this? And I mean, Clint has always been kind of just like
weathered,
scraggly and weathered. I mean, that was always kind of his appeal. Yeah. He was never fresh-faced.
Yeah.
But it is amazing because the last time I was watching In the Line of Fire, I was thinking to myself, I had to. This is the reason why I know Tom Cruise's age and Clint Eastwood's age relative to it, because I had to look it up because I was like, is he like Tom Cruise's age when he's doing this? He's almost. So yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, the time does different things to different people.
Sure,
but I think Eastwood also has always kind of gravitated towards that type of movie in a way. I mean, even something like Outlaw Josie Wales or even the Leone westerns, they're not old man pictures, but they have a reflective quality to them. Yeah. That's just kind of where Clint lives at his best.
They're not like origin stories, right? They're just like, here's this guy who's like on this adventure, and we're like picking up on the adventure.
But he has a past.
He has a past.
Like,
exactly.
This is a person with a past.
And it's haunting him.
Yeah, and he has demons, and he has to, and especially in Outlaw Josie Wales, there is very much a sense of this person has to like move on. The world that he knew doesn't exist anymore, and he has to move on. So that has been an area that that Clint has worked since time immemorial.
Yeah. Do you think too that the movies that he made in the later half of his career have also similarly had this kind of, reflective, looking back at the past kind of quality? Because, I mean, one that comes to mind that we watched recently is Changeling, which has this kind of, Changeling feels like a movie about the 20s, but made in the 2000s, because it's fully embraced the knowing political stance that has come to be, more received in the latter half of the 20th century, looking back on this time. And so I do wonder...
That's like an outraged movie.
Yeah. And so I do wonder if you would say that's like a theme in a lot of his later directorial efforts.
I mean, I think he has always had a certain reflective quality in that so many of his films as a director, I find, are about they're sort of about healing a fragmented society or reconciling a fragmented society. I mean, so many of his films they're very much movies about settings that have been kind of ruined in some way. I mean, Outlaw Josie Wales is an obvious example, post-Civil War America, where there's no sense of a country at that point. Everybody refers to each other by where they're from. And, you'll see this trend in his films. And, even something like, which is not a very good movie, but Invictus, which is not about America at all, but it is kind of about like bringing together this like completely broken country. And I think that's this thing that runs throughout many of his, or the Flags of Our Fathers. I mean, those are all, and the lies that we have to tell sometimes, or sometimes the truths that we have to tell. I mean, there is always the sense that something in the past has been broken in some way, and it's important to try and find some way to reconcile that. That's a common theme in his movies.
Yeah, and let me bring that theme back to In the Line of Fire, because one of the things that is so interesting about this movie is that he's haunted by a particular moment in the past, namely the assassination of JFK. Mm-hmm. And that's a moment which, I was not alive in that moment. And so I can only understand it through the lens of, history and so on. But that moment actually in the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, I think together, were moments where the country felt like it was on the brink of a kind of collapse. And that there similar to what you were talking about with Josie Wales in the post-Reconstruction or, post-Civil War Reconstruction era, the country is so divided, and there's the schism that's punctuated by these assassinations. I mean, and then also MLK and so on. There's just so many assassinations of leading figures in that moment. So it felt like there was this big rift that needed then to be healed. And you can think of that as kind of infecting the character of Frank Horrigan himself, who he's driven to remain in the game, partly because he needs to heal that very rift, because he feels some responsibility for it, because he feels, as a Secret Service agent tasked with protecting a president who was killed on his watch, of course he feels some degree of responsibility. But he can't overcome it. There were other agents there, but he's the only one who of that time is still in the field. He's still sort of needing to be in the line of fire, so to speak. And that seems to be, and then of course he does find a reconciliation by the end of the movie. But I do think it's interesting that that rift seems to be, the central motivating force for him. And interestingly, I think it's also the central motivating force, maybe in a different way, for his antagonist, Mitch Leary, played by John Malkovich, who you could imagine was basically turned into an assassin on the basis of events, around that time because of the Cold War. So at the moment of as Kennedy's assassination, Mitch is probably trained in Secret Service or special ops and that sort of thing, and he's being sent off to, go and do covert ops in Vietnam or something, mm-hmm. And or maybe he's a little bit younger than that. But either way, he's being trained in this way, and so the two of them come from this vision in U.S. culture or whatever, and then they're brought back. These two sides of the coin, the protector and the assassin, are brought back around to join back up. And it's only in their sort of joining or reuniting that there can be a kind of healing or moving forward.
Yeah, because, this is a film of the Pax Americana, if you will, right? That period from basically the end of the Cold War until basically September 11th.
Mm-hmm.
That brief period, some of us know it as the 90s. The last, now that I call it the last good decade, a thing I never thought I would ever say during the 90s. But this period when, in retrospect, this is all in retrospect.
Yeah.
But the threat of nuclear annihilation had been removed, because that's what I grew up with.
Yep.
In the 80s, that's the thing. It's people talk about how Generation X didn't really ever have to deal. I'm we grew up assuming that we were all going to be incinerated by nuclear weapons. That's a thing I remember very consciously constantly thinking about in the 1980s. So you lived under that threat.
Mm-hmm.
And then like one day, quote unquote, not one day, it took a period, but one day it was over.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't like, the nukes were still out there, but there was like the Soviet Empire had collapsed. Iron Curtain had fallen, Berlin Wall had fallen. All these countries in formerly the USSR and Eastern Europe were changing. There was this period of prosperity. Of course, it didn't feel like that necessarily at the time. I mean, there was all sorts of, this is also when, Fox News goes on the air, and Newt Gingrich and all these other people. Yeah. And then, we have the Lewinsky affair and all that. But so it was a turbulent time, definitely. Oklahoma City, all sorts of crazy shit is happening at this time. But there was this sense that, as Leary says, there's nothing left worth fighting for. Yeah. There was this kind of emptiness. Now, of course, many of us long for that emptiness. Right. But there was that sense of, people said, the end of history, post-history. Yep. And here are these two figures kind of at the end of history who then have to kind of, they're ghosts. They're both ghosts, yep. Right? Leary calls himself Booth, right? He is in some ways assuming the identity or the specter of all the assassins. Mm-hmm. So both of these guys are out of their time and have to kind of confront each other, and in confronting each other, confront the past.
Right.
And that's, I think, I don't know that the film is like much deeper than that. I don't think the film necessarily has like this complicated vision of history or something like that. But just that grace note, I think, adds an incredibly moving quality to what is otherwise just, an expertly made action movie.
Yeah.
Totally.
Oh, I just had never thought about, we haven't watched all of Clint Eastwood's direct movie. He's made so many, but it's interesting to think about it in the lens of healing something that's broken, and he has like a focus on that. Because I was also just thinking about, Frank's character and his relationship to the country and his job, mm-hmm. which I never really thought about. Of course, there are so many government jobs that are apolitical. They remain and go on and do their work regardless of who's sitting in the executive office or in the Congress. But Frank is patriotic without being jingoistic. He cares deeply about America, but also sees its flaws. And he's like, it's like complete, it's all symbolic for him. Like, he doesn't even want to meet the president, really. Like, he doesn't want to talk to him. It's not important who that guy is or what he believes, or, who supports him. It's about like protecting the democracy, protecting the structure of America that will eventually, make change for good, which I think he believes. Although he clearly has a lot of feelings about what the CIA has done in the past 30 years.
It's and that's another reason I think why I personally find this movie so moving, is because I feel like I've had this interesting relationship to America. I wasn't born here. I came here when I was 7. We moved to Washington, D.C., the heart of the U.S. government. And I kind of grew up around D.C. and everything that it represented. And a lot of people I went to school with were people whose, parents were in government or whatnot. And it took me, I had a green card for many, many years. It's funny. I got a green card as a kid. And then for the longest time, I didn't know how to just like get citizenship. And I kept putting it off, but I also kept leaving the country for extended periods of time to, go to Turkey, or, I went to Russia and worked at one point. And later on I found, I would find out, oh shit, I wasn't supposed to leave for that long. Like, you're actually not supposed to leave the country for that long before you become a citizen. So it took me years to become a citizen, but it was always, and I think maybe a lot of immigrants maybe feel this way, especially now. Like, nowadays when you can just say any horrible thing about America and just, get endless applause on Twitter and stuff like that. This is a incredible country in so many ways. And there's no other country like it, really. And in ways both good and bad. But the thing that I remember, and this is something that I think Billy Wilder also said, which is, America's the only country where I was asked this question, and he said this as well, where like I hadn't become a citizen yet. And people would ask me, why haven't you become a citizen yet? Like, why haven't you become an American yet? America's one of the very few, I don't think it's the only country, but it's one of the very few countries where someone will ask you that question.
Mm.
In no other country, no one says, "Why haven't you become French yet?" They don't say that. They say, "What makes you think you can become French?" I mean, I was born in the UK, and I actually have a UK passport. And for many years before I became a US citizen, I was a British citizen, even though I'd never lived there. And when I would talk to British people about the fact that I was a UK citizen, they seemed so pissed off. They would never said it. They never said this to me, but there was always the sense of like, how the fuck did you become British? Like, what makes you think you're British?
Right.
America doesn't. Now, I think things are a little different these days, and there are people who will say that. But for so much of my life, I was never asked a question of like, what makes you think you can become an American?
Mm-hmm.
It was always the opposite. Why haven't you become an American yet? You should become a citizen, you know? And that is incredibly moving to me. And that there is that quality of a belief in the institutions.
That's right.
A belief in the fact that there is something fundamentally right about the structure of the country, which of course we know has all sorts of problems. And in fact, I mean, even Clint of all people, who's sort of one of the more iconically right-wing figures, to have him say the line, "What did that guy do for you? Run crack for the Contras?" You know, like, I mean, or sell guns to Iran. Like, that's actually a loaded thing for someone like Clint to say. But the that idea, and that, you know, there's that speech he gives later in the film, the idea that for him, he has to lay his life down for the president, no matter who the president is.
Yeah.
He has to lay his life down not for the person, but for the institution that person represents. And even that, you know, there's that little thing about Nixon, like the fact that he, you know, didn't really get along with the Nixon people. You know, like he still has to, you know, he's in the line of fire. He's the guy who dies for the institution, like
That's
literally has to die for the institution. And that is an incredible position to be in. Obviously, you know, it's an action movie. It's a fictional character, so it's not like this is a real person saying this. But, you know, one hopes that that's how Secret Service agents think. You never know. But that is, I don't know. I find that incredibly moving.
You know, so that is, I think, one way to characterize the difference between Mitch and Frank. So Frank is the institutionalist, the believer in the institution, and Mitch is sort of the arch individualist. So there are a couple quotes of Mitch that I just thought were just really helpful and sort of articulating this. He says, "Watching the president, I couldn't help wondering why a man like you would risk his life to save a man like that." You know, like this idea that like you're a hero, like you're a rugged individualist. You're the guy people should venerate, not this cowardly politician. Why would you put your life down for him? To which, now he doesn't say anything really in that moment, but to which Frank's response is basically, I'm not putting my life down for him. I'm putting my life down for the country. I put my life down for what I believe in as like this entire system of government that we've built. That's what I'm, you know, in the line of fire for. But then Mitch is basically, I'm just thinking of this, this isn't the actual like way they're having this conversation, but to which Mitch might then respond something like, "Look, you know, there's not really any cause worth fighting for." He says this. He says, "All we have is the game. I'm on offense. You're on defense." And I just, again, think like he sees this as politics as just as a reductionary thing. So it's like, or as reductionist is the word actually. So it's politics, just like a bunch of individuals engaged in, and it could, you know, the individuals are ultimately what matters. They are the ones who comprise the institutions, but it's the individuals at the bottom ultimately. And they're playing a game. We're just playing this game of power. We're just struggling to get power and that sort of thing. And, you know, whatever we seem like we're shackled by these institutions, but we could change those rules. Like, it doesn't really matter. In a way, the politician I think that most exemplifies the kind of Mitch approach in today's world, not politically, but just in terms of this, who cares about institutions, is Mitch McConnell. Because Mitch McConnell is the kind of guy who, you know, he just says when the rule goes his way, he's suddenly like, this is the most important thing. We have to follow these rules. But when the rule doesn't go his way, he doesn't give a shit. He just, you know, breaks it, just, you know, doesn't give Obama a chance to put his nominee before the Senate and that kind of thing. And so that kind of, and then of course that to someone who's like an institutionalist, to someone who believes like, no, we need to be bound by these rules. That's like the most irritating thing. Of course, it's also irritating when you're on the other side of it politically. But, for someone like Frank, he embodies this kind of, no, there's something above and beyond the people, that there's a principle that's guiding us. And that's more important than the result necessarily that we get, the political result that we get. And I think in today's day and age, that is the one thing that I think is kind of lacking in a lot of the political discourse. You see, especially on Twitter. I mean, but you see on Twitter like, oh, it's results driven. It's like, why didn't this guy do this thing? Why didn't Obama do this? He's a terrible president. Blah blah blah. But then you think like, no, there's a reason why you don't just get to like go and become president and do whatever the hell you want. You're bound by the divided government and all that sort of thing, and that actually there's a value to having that, because it allows for opt-in and buy-in and legitimacy and that sort of thing. And if we were to have this kind of radical shift every time there was a new party in power, you wouldn't, in some sense, you wouldn't really have a country. You just have this massively changing, complicated system that no one would be able to peg their life to.
Yeah. I mean, we sort of have that country right now.
Yes,
the world that Mitch McConnell has created for us. I do think that, Frank's point of view is, I think, in today's world, maybe an outdated point of view. Maybe it's not an outdated. Maybe it's just that we spend so much time on social media. If you spend enough time with the idiot children of Twitter, there's only so much that you're going to be able to believe in.
Yeah.
I think that, it is an ancient notion, right? I mean, that's kind of like the person who most exemplifies. This is going to sound so, tin-eared and quote unquote neoliberal, but I think of somebody like Joe Biden as being like a Frank, or like
totally.
Very much an institutionalist, very much willing to actually stake his own reputation / his life on the survival of institutions.
Yep.
And I didn't think of Mitch as being more of a Mitch McConnell type. I thought of him more of like a libertarian type. This idea that it doesn't, it's like, you're this guy, why should you give your life for this person? Which is a good question. It's like, if you boil it down to that essence, it sounds like a perfectly reasonable question. But the bigger question is, do you believe in anything? And do you need to believe in something for society and civilization to function? And I think the idea is yes. But yeah, I do think that there is an interesting, correlative to that. And of course, Joe Biden is approximately the age that Clint Eastwood is.
Yeah.
Probably, maybe it makes sense in that sense. But yeah, I think, one of the things, the other reason why I love this movie is I think it's a great DC movie, and having grown up there, even though I think they shot a lot of it in like Philadelphia. But it is, it does feel very DC to me. And now that can feel like a real, like one of the reasons why I do revisit this movie. I revisit a lot of DC movies for some reason, which is also why like All the President's Men, besides being wonderful, is also such a great comfort watch for me. Because, DC movies for some reason.
I love DC movies. I don't have that same kind. I lived there for a summer, but I just love a good DC movie.
Oh, yeah. Exorcist.
Oh, yeah.
It's a beautiful city.
Yeah.
It is. It's actually a more beautiful city than people give it credit for. It's actually, I think, in some ways, a more cinematic city. It doesn't quite have the sort of, it doesn't have the sameness that a lot of other cities, like it doesn't have the urban sprawl of other cities. But the thing, the rule about like not building anything taller than the Washington Monument, like that actually results in a very different skyline than any other city that you'll get. So you don't get these giant corporate skyscrapers and things. You get them in the suburbs, obviously, but also DC is. It's a point a friend of mine made many years ago who had lived there for a while, and he said it's unlike many other cities. And a lot of other cities, they get maybe more interesting and vibrant as you get closer to the center of the city, whereas in DC, that is spread out, because the closer you get to the center of the city, you just get like giant. You'll get like the Supreme Court and the Department of Justice. Like you'll get these giant institutional buildings, which are beautiful, the neoclassical, architecture and all that. But you're not going to get like if you're looking for different cultures and things like that, you're going to have to actually go out to the outskirts, and that's an interesting reversal of the urban dynamic.
That's right. That's
yeah, totally. When I lived there for a summer, I was at I was interning at the Corcoran, and it was so funny how the place, that immediate area, would be completely abandoned on the weekends because everybody just worked there. Nobody really lived there. But then we had, of course, we'd go further afield and Adams Morgan and have so much fun in that city. But it was really weird. I couldn't get lunch on a Saturday because all the restaurants were closed on the weekends because they only served people who worked there.
that was the thing. Well, that's the thing, is that if you want if you're in the middle of DC and you need a good meal, I mean, it's better now, but it used to be like, you kind of had to go to like one of the museum cafeterias. And people who work in DC know like which ones have the good cafeterias. And I remember my mom would always be like, National Gallery of Art, they have the best cafeteria, and it was always a thing. And I remember I would go to the AFI theater back when it was in DC. It was in the Kennedy Center. It's now since moved to Silver Spring. They built their own thing, but there was a theater inside the Kennedy Center. And I would go there all the time for movies. And there's, like if you wanted to eat a meal, you had to like bring a sandwich. There was no place to go. So that was, that was always, but at the same time, there was something that was part of the experience.
Yeah.
So anyway, I can talk about DC forever.
My feel on DC, I've talked about it a few times, but my feeling is like, as a setting for a movie, it's like a place where if you point the camera one way, you would not know you're in DC, except unless you're a local. But if you point it the other way, you're getting like the Washington Monument or something. Yeah. But I love that feeling that like it feels like, and you mentioned that some of this was filmed in Philadelphia, but that's the thing about DC. I feel like I wouldn't know. If they had taken out all the government buildings and forgotten, I've forgotten the plot of the movie or something, I'd be like, yeah, where is this set? It doesn't quite look like Boston. It's kind of like Philadelphia, but not. Yeah. It doesn't look like New York, obviously. You're like a little lost. It gets old. It's old, but you could kind of get lost there. And then, of course, you have like the subway too, like, which is like its own, I don't know, like its own beast. It's a completely different design. I just really
love the DC subway.
Yeah, me too. Yeah,
DC Metro.
That's beautiful. Space age subway. Yeah, I love it.
It is funny too how the nostalgia of watching films that are set in the places you grew up. I grew up in Dallas, so there's not a lot of Dallas movies. But if I find a movie that's filmed in Dallas, I'm like immediately way more inclined to love it, even if it's not great.
Bottle Rocket, I was going to say.
I mean, Bottle Rocket is for sure, because the Wilson brothers went to the brother school for my all-girls school. And there is like in a scene where when Luke Wilson goes to talk to his little sister, she's wearing, I went to a school called Hockaday. She's wearing Hockaday plaid. They filmed it at the boys' school, but they pretend it's the girls' school. Anyway, I love Bottle Rocket, but I think I couldn't not just because it's a Dallas movie. Yeah. There are not that many of them.
The Bottle Rocket is still my favorite Wes Anderson movie. I love Wes Anderson, but Bottle Rocket, for some reason, that's the one that's still my favorite. I just go back to.
It's
and it has that Texas flavor.
It's got the Texas
which
flavor.
I really think is a part of it.
Can I just bring this back to Mitch and Frank real quick?
I wish you would.
I want to just mention one other thing about this, because they have this antagonistic relationship, but they also
love each other.
Have a kind of love. There's something there that draws them together. And I was thinking there are a lot of instances of this in popular culture. You have like in Heat and everything, but you also have it in Batman and the Joker. And part of the reason I think that they're drawn together is that much like Batman and the Joker, they need each other. The institutionalist needs, especially the protector institutionalist, the protector of the institutions needs a threat, or else he's irrelevant. And the assassin needs a target. So they sort of need each other to like have meaning in their lives. And I think that's, and Mitch even is explicit about this. He says,
I'm waiting for you to show me some goddamn gratitude. Without me, you'd still just be another sad-eyed piano-playing drunk.
I brought you into this game. I let you keep up with me. I made you a goddamn hero today.
You didn't make me anything.
I redeemed your pathetic, shitty life.
I just did my job. You're the one with the fucking pathetic life.
Go ahead and shoot, damn it.
He explicitly tells Frank, "You owe me for what I've done. I've given your life purpose." What's interesting is that although he has redeemed Frank, so to speak, because Frank has been looking for that opportunity to jump in front of the bullet ever since JFK. It seems that's why he wants to stay in the line of fire. It seems he wants that chance to like prove that he could do it. But once he's sort of done it, it does seem like the relief comes from actually turning away from it. And then in that final scene, he leaves the room. He doesn't decide to stay and listen to Mitch's extensive phone message. They just walk out. And I think that which shows like he's actually finally found peace. He's in some sense he's retired, right? He's stopped the striving that has driven him and driven everyone in his life away from him and made him into this kind of like shallow shell of the man he once was. But it is interesting though that like he owes Mitch for ultimately providing him that opportunity, which I think is really interesting because there are lots of instances of this in literature and so on, but it's very explicit in this movie, and I feel like that elevates it.
And that is actually something about this film that we should mention. This is actually a very influential movie. It maybe isn't as discussed that much now, but a number of films came out after this, and I don't know that they were all, they might have all been in production before, but films like Blown Away and Speed, which come out, like basically within a couple of years after this. I mean, there was this thing of like the cat and mouse thriller is obviously not, this movie didn't invent it, but that sense of the game between two antagonists like this, and I mean, Heat obviously before this was
that's right,
LA Takedown, so it's
yep,
I think Michael Mann wrote that in the 70s or 80s and whatnot, but I do think that In the Line of Fire kind of so perfected and crystallized this idea that a lot of films kind of borrowed from it over the years. And it was memed a lot at the time. I mean, you'll see, The Simpsons references it, the whole gun jumping in front of the gun. Like that's Homer does that. Right? I mean, that's from In the Line of Fire. Because that was before, obviously, we didn't have the platform for memes, but that was a thing. Like people talked about that scene and we joked about it and stuff like that. So this film was actually, it was obviously a very big hit, but it was very influential in that regard. I mean, for a few years, you would see a trailer. They would cut trailers to look more like In the Line of Fire. You would get more of this like cat and mouse thing.
Interesting.
And I think Malkovich was nominated for an Oscar for this film. It's a pretty big, that's a big deal for an action movie. The other thing I wanted to note though is, this sense of the past coming back and these characters kind of gripped by the past. I think that Morricone's score adds so much to that because this idea that after all these years, Morricone is back scoring a Clint Eastwood movie like that meant something because, obviously what made Morricone and what made Clint Eastwood were the Leone Westerns.
Yeah.
But I don't think Morricone scored anything with Eastwood after that until this.
Wow.
And it is, and this is Morricone in kind of this period when his work was much more muted and melancholy and was perfect for this kind of reflecting on the past style. I mean, a lot of his scores from this period sound similar in that sense. Like they feel like they could all be for the same movie. Like Bugsy, his score for Bugsy is like that.
I see.
And but there is that very reflective quality to his scores from this period, which is just perfect for this movie. To see an aging Clint Eastwood reckoning with the past, with the 60s, with the Kennedy assassination. And remember, this is also like a couple of years after JFK comes out. So this is a period when we were in like, JFK assassination hog heaven for several years.
Yeah.
Right. And this is a time when, like Oliver Stone's JFK now seems like such a crazy film. It's a wonderful film. I love it, but it's so clearly, he's so nuts. At the time, it didn't feel that way at all. At the time, it was like, oh my God, this like horrible miscarriage of justice has happened. And, like, the CIA and like all these people and LBJ, they all conspired to kill Kennedy. And oh my God, how could we have been so blind? I remember George Herbert Walker Bush, there was somebody asked him at like a press conference about it, and he said something like, I see no reason to doubt the Warren Commission report or something like that. And people were just like, how could he say that? I mean,
what a dummy.
If Twitter existed at that time, he would have been dragged on Twitter remorselessly, and it would be like, how this idiot, this aging idiot, how could he possibly still believe the Warren Commission report? So there was the sense that like, JFK was killed by the most elaborate conspiracy ever in the history of humanity, working somehow like clockwork on like anything else in the United States in the 1960s. And so when Clint says that line, some people say it was the CIA, the Cuban, blah, 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 and he just kind of discards it all. That actually is a very loaded thing he's saying at the time. Like today, it feels like, oh, yeah, I mean, of course he's, of course he'd say that. Back then, it was kind of like,
he's taking a stand.
He really doesn't care who killed JFK. Like that was a big deal for him to say that in 1993.
That's interesting.
I didn't think about that context. I am like just on the verge of being a conspiracy theorist. It's tough. I love JFK, and I get really conspiracy brained after I watch it.
Have you guys done a JFK episode?
No, we will. It's coming. I mean, JFK to me is like cocaine in film form, so I have to like prepare myself.
It is cocaine in film form. It absolutely is cocaine. No. I mean, there are several Oliver Stone films for which one could say that for perhaps obvious reasons. But no, I mean, JFK is, I mean, every 5 years that movie changes and its effect changes, but it's always awesome.
Yeah.
It's just the way you feel about it and about yourself afterwards is just very different.
That is interesting. That is interesting.
You got to revisit it.
That is, that's actually one of the highest points of praise I think you can give for a movie is that revisiting it will redeem, you kind of come at it differently every time. I think that's really the mark of the very high art. I mean, it's on the list. It's been on the list because of Laura's love affair with JFK. I mean,
awesome.
we were recently in,
makes me very happy.
We were in Dallas a few years ago, and like,
oh, right. You're from Dallas.
Laura's from Dallas.
Yeah.
And
I've been to that book depository many times, every school field trip.
So Laura took me there to Dallas, and we were like, hey, we got to go check out the book depository. And then we also decide, we're up at the grassy knoll and everything. And then, of course, there's like like
5 or 6 guys, like bearded dudes with like DVD players that are like, let me explain to you.
Yeah, they got the laminated.
It couldn't have been Oswald. It had to come, and I'm just sitting here being like,
Laura's like,
really good points.
Let me paint you the picture, Bilge. So we're there, and I'm looking at this guy's, he's got a laminated sheet. He's got like a laser pointer and stuff. And I'm like, this is insane. And I look over at Laura, and she's basically like taking notes. She's like, okay. And she's like, we left. She's like, we should go and like buy that guy's DVD. I was like, are you fucking kidding me?
Have you read Reclaiming History?
No, I haven't.
It's here somewhere. It's in one of these files back here. I have both the full version and then the version that's like they released like the middle 600 pages of it. No, because it's such an enormous book that they were like, you know what? Let's just put out the part that is actually about the assassination. And it's like this great narrative. But one of the things I love about that book is that here is somebody who isn't a conspiracy theorist, but and is actually debunking all the conspiracies, but he's arguably more obsessed with this event than any of the conspiracy, because he absolutely, I mean, Bugliosi just like went all in on every single detail he could. And it's like, I mean, it's like an incredibly OCD book. It's actually hard to read for that reason, but once it gets into the narrative of the day, it's beautiful. But yeah,
Christmas present.
Thanks, sweetie.
Oh yeah, there you go. The thing I was gonna say though, speech is like the wrong word, but that scene in the hotel room at night when he's looking out and talking about that date.
Yeah.
I find that, I think that's kind of maybe the best bit of acting Clint Eastwood has ever done. And Wolfgang Petersen actually has this, and when he talks about it on the commentary track, he talks about how during that scene, he told Rene Russo, he didn't tell Clint she was going to do this. He told Rene Russo to, at one point while he's talking, to grab his hand, but not in a shot. Like, so it was on Clint's close-up. So they were doing his close up when he's doing his, when he's remembering that day. And she's just there to kind of just provide lines and, do her off camera thing. But Wolfgang Petersen told her to, clutch his hand at just the right moment. And that's the moment when Eastwood breaks down. And I don't think I've ever seen Clint Eastwood cry in a movie.
Right.
I think this is the only time he's ever done it. And he chokes up, and he's really choking up. And I think that's one of my absolute favorite scenes in any movie anywhere. But also, the thing about his performance that's so fascinating, it's not just that he's so moved, it's that he's like he almost breaks character, because he's like surprised that he's like the tear comes down and he like recoils. It's like, whoa, what's going on? Like, he's surprised at how moved he is and how broken up he is. And it's the only time, I think, maybe there are some other times, but even in Outlaw Jersey Wales, after he loses his family, it's we don't see tears, we see rage, So it's very interesting to see Clint Eastwood be moved in that way on screen, while Ennio Morricone is just like ladling it on. It's just such an incredible, anyone who grew up watching, the Leone Westerns, that scene is just so incredibly powerful. And, it's a great, and that was the one shot where he did it. That was only good for one take, and they got that. And
wow.
That was it.
Yeah.
And, that's the kind of thing that, like, Wolfgang Petersen is kind of thought of as like a great action director, but I actually think he's a really good director of character as well.
Yeah, that scene, and we talk about the metafictional stuff here a little bit, because I think Clint Eastwood is like, whatever, he was like the next generation John Wayne, and these paragons of masculinity. They have to like exude and exhibit in their characters, but also in their real life, because there's not really any separating the two. At a certain point, you're just kind of like John Wayne is he's just like a character, basically. And it's similarly with Clint Eastwood. You're just like, yeah, he's just this cowboy who walks off into the distance, into the sunset. You almost can't.
He's always Clint.
Yeah,
he's
always
Clint.
Clint.
The couple of movies where we know his character's name, yeah, we do, like William Money, but it's Clint.
Yeah.
It's Clint. It's like the same with the Ringo Kid and Ethan Edwards. I think are just like the only two, and I guess Rooster Cogburn, but like the only 2 or 3 John Wayne movies where we actually remember the character's name.
Yeah.
But he's always just John Wayne.
Yeah.
And Clint is always Clint.
And so it's interesting that the way you set up, the way you talk about the scene, Bilge, because the surprise had to have been, in some sense, that collapsing of the metafictional with the fictional, where he had identified with the character so strongly and had surprised himself. And probably, I would imagine that part of when he's acting, he is conscious of the fact that he needs to exude a certain type of masculinity. And throughout the movie, he does. He's yelling a lot when Malkovich will, Malkovich, I feel like, often gets the better of him in a lot of their exchanges. And that seems to like irritate the character, and maybe also was irritating Clint Eastwood. And it kind of was all coming through. And then there's this moment where all that masculine facade breaks in that moment of emotional resonance. And, and that just adds that depth, because I don't know enough about, the craft and everything to know, like, if that sort of thing happens frequently with actors, but it does seem very special.
It doesn't happen with Clint. It happens with other actors seek that kind of stuff out.
Sure.
I think Clint was notable for not being that type of actor. He was doing, the thing I always say is, a great actor is defined by their skill and their range. A great movie star is defined by their limitations. They know what they can do and what they can't do, and they stick within this range of things that they can do. And every once in a while, a great movie star will try to become a great actor, and they don't always succeed. And Clint has been, the fact that I'm calling him Clint, I don't know the guy. I don't think I've ever been in the same room as the guy. But I think he has always understood his limitations.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of the Man with No Name films. The story you always hear, I'm assuming it's not apocryphal, is, he had all these lines in Fistful of Dollars. His character apparently was supposed to have all these lines that they had written down, and he was just like, I'm not saying this. It was like that poorly written, Italians writing cowboy dialogue kind of stuff. And I think he was just like, no, we're not doing this. And what a decision. The other thing I did want to note about the JFK thing, I mean, also, like, remember, Clint is alive when all this is happening. I mean, he's, like, it would be like, us probably talking about September 11th or something like that. Like, I mean, it was a national trauma that everybody lived through. But maybe the reason why he's so surprised that he's so moved by it is, I always think of Clint as also kind of a big time Republican. I don't know that he was a big JFK guy. So the idea of him shedding tears over JFK, I mean, not that he wanted him dead or anything like that, but it does. Yeah. There is something very surprising about that if you know anything about Clint's kind of personal politics and his kind of iconic. I mean, because he was very much, remember, in the 80s, he's very much a right wing figure. I mean, he's very much, maybe not quite as much as like a Chuck Norris or an Arnold Schwarzenegger, but and obviously he's a little more refined than those guys. But he, I mean, movies like Firefox and Heartbreak Ridge and all that. There's definitely the sense of he's coming at this from the right. So yeah.
Oh, I'm still thinking about that hotel scene, and I love that scene too. And there's this constant sort of rumination on anxiety about not just would you take a bullet for somebody, but actually could you? And it's like one of these things. There's so few, vocations, so few jobs, so few things that were like you truly cannot know if you would do that until you're in the moment. And God, that would be so heartbreaking to like think that you are a person who would do it, and then in the moment you don't do it and you don't even know why, and then grappling with that for 30 years. And, because I know I love the conversations he has with Al about this impulse to protect and yet not sure if you could really do it when it comes down to the wire and what that means about you. It weirdly made me think about motherhood because I had all these ideas about how I would be as a mom or how I would feel when I had a baby or what I would do in these circumstances. And I had no way of knowing what it was going to be like on the other side. There was just like, it was completely different than I thought it would be. And it was like upsetting to me in some sense that it wasn't quite like I wasn't who I thought I was in those moments,
To project your own capacity for sacrifice is an interesting thing because it's not just taking the bullet. It's about actively jumping into the bullet.
Yep.
That's the dynamic. By the way, also, I mean, another thing that this movie turned into a meme is that line, taking a bullet for. I don't remember people using that line before this movie. I mean, I'm sure it existed, but like this movie kind of made it a thing that, it like entered into the common lexicon. Nobody talked about taking a bullet for anybody before this movie came out, it was just not a thing you said. It's like finding out the movie, that there was a certain movie in which somebody talked about like, this is not the hill we die on. And it incepted that idea into the culture. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's not just about like, would you be okay if you were there and somebody shot and they hit you instead? It's not that, or if you were in between them. It's not like whether I would be okay with this. It's whether I would be willing to just dive in front of that. But then that's why at the end he has to die.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as it's kind of a silly shot almost. I mean, Clint Eastwood, 62-year-old Clint Eastwood flying through the air. But it is really like it's very important for that to happen.
Yes. No, I think. Well, I mean, I think the way, given what Laura was saying, I was thinking that is what he has been seeking. He has to have the opportunity to do this. To sort of, he wants another shot to try to act in the moment. So it's
so he can like know that he is the person he
exactly,
thinks he is,
exactly,
that he wants to be, that he needs to be.
Yeah, and so it is essential for him to do that. And if it there is this element of cheesiness to it, sure, but I think it's absolutely essential that he does it. And and once he does it, in some sense, you kind of see his character like relax, because then the last little bit, which is, you might think is the actual climax of the movie, I actually think it's more of like a coda. With the part where now they're in the elevator and stuff, because Frank in that moment is resigned at that. He's like, he could die. He's fine. He would be, my sense is he would be okay with dying in that moment.
Yeah.
He just wants them to get Mitch and take him out. That's why he says, take the shot. Now, granted, he's down, but like he's willing to get hit in the crossfire.
And because he's willing to do that, and because he's totally fine with it at that point. That's why that line, aim high, that's why that line is so unexpected and delightful in the end, because you're not expecting him to say that.
Mm-hmm.
It makes perfect sense that he would say it, but you're not expecting him to say that. You're like, okay, he's resigned to his fate.
Yeah.
He's just fine. Just blow the hell out of this elevator, kill both of us, end it now. My work here is done.
Yep.
But that little like aim high, like that moment is just like him saying, fuck it.
Well, it also,
I'll keep going.
Because now he has a life to go back to.
Right? That's a great point. No, that's a great point. Yeah. That he sort of recognized like, I overcame the demons, and like now, that's interesting. That's
and that's classic popular Hollywood filmmaking.
Yeah.
Sure.
You convince us that the hero is ready to die, and you convince us even that the hero maybe has died, and this is what Nolan does over and over again. But then you bring them back, and there's the relief and, possibility of sequels and all that. But also, like, we don't walk out depressed.
Right.
We don't walk out of the theater depressed. We're like, okay, well, that was great. It was really exciting. I'm very sad. Clint Eastwood's dead.
Yeah.
It's not, you don't walk out saying that. You're like, you feel satisfied and happy.
It also is a middle finger to Mitch, because Mitch thinks that he's talking to him, but he's talking on the intercom. And then when Mitch realizes that, you see the eyes
so
widen,
mad.
and he gets mad.
He's so mad.
So I like that.
Well, and also, and that also sets up that the phone call, the answering machine, because he's just like, and it's interesting because Mitch seems to have gamed out that Frank might actually survive.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think he knows he's going to die. He's convinced the president is going to die.
Yeah.
But he's not convinced that Frank is going to die. But I don't know if he's convinced that Frank is not going to die because Frank isn't going to take that bullet. So there is that there's that uncertainty. But Clint has obviously it's a happy ending. So Clint has managed. He has taken the bullet, but he's survived, and he's gotten the girl, and now he's got somebody. Now he's got somebody to drive him everywhere he wants.
Why doesn't that man drive? Drives me crazy.
He likes public transportation.
Whatever.
Laura.
He was I lived in New York. I'm like, 45 years ago? What the fuck, dude?
So as someone who also doesn't drive, that's another reason why.
You live in New York right now.
I live in New York right now, and I grew up in DC. That was one of the few times when I remember seeing an action hero who didn't drive.
He just had to bum a ride everywhere. Yeah.
It's a good pickup line.
It was like my friends would have to drive me all over. I mean, I used the subway, metro, DC Metro all the time. I loved walking. I took the buses, blah, blah, blah. But every once in a while, a friend would have to drive me somewhere. And, the negotiation of having to ask without quite asking, just waiting for them to offer to drive me. Yeah, it was a whole thing.
You didn't just like offer to, buy somebody some ice cream and insult them as you do it?
I do that now.
Okay.
Now I just bribe people. Yes, I'll buy you a steak.
We've talked a lot about Clint Eastwood, but Malkovich in this movie, and I at the top said it was my favorite Malkovich performance. Now, I mean, there are a lot of them, but I really like this one. And
not Deepwater Horizon.
I like Deepwater Horizon a lot, actually.
That movie rules. That movie rules, and he's great in it.
He's so good in it.
He's so good in it. I really love that. Like there is that period of like Mark Wahlberg, saving the world from real life disasters. I don't love all those movies, but that one is great.
I like it. I like that one a lot. But anyway, but he in this movie just controls every single scene that he's in, like completely dominates the scenes. Even when he's just in a scene where he's on the phone with Clint Eastwood, which is wild and must have been for him incredibly intimidating. Well, I don't actually know. I don't want to say that, but he's younger than Clint Eastwood, so I would imagine there's some aspect of that where it would have been intimidating. But either way, he just he sets the pace, he sets the tone. When he's the one who gets angry first, he elevates, and then Clint has to follow. Like there's a lot of like him dictating how these conversations are going to go. And the other thing I like about him is we were talking about like, well, who else could have played this role? But Malkovich brings this level of like erudition and learnedness and high class, and he has like a vocabulary, he has a way of enunciating. He's a stage actor, and so he can bring something elevated to this role. And what I like about it versus like, when he's Cyrus the Virus is when he's Cyrus the Virus, it doesn't quite work for me as in the same way because he's clearly this sort of, he's supposed to be playing like more like lower class or something. But here it works because you could see like he's an assassin. He's going to have to run in high society circles. He's going to have to like, dress up and he has to be this master of disguise. So that that element of theatricality that comes through in the performance makes perfect sense. But I just love it. Every time he's on the screen, I'm just like, ooh, I could have gone for 20 more minutes of Malkovich.
Oh, I want an entire Mitch movie.
Yeah, I mean, if only they'd done the prequel. He also has this like slightly feminine quality.
Yes.
Effeminate maybe is the word. I mean, and this was obviously a very 80s, 90s thing of like the slight, homoerotic tension. But that in turn also forces Eastwood to confront his masculinity. This very macho icon being confronted by John Malkovich in full-on John Malkovich mode.
That president is coming home from California in a fucking box.
Where in California?
The address? Come on, Frank. I'll keep you in the game, but I'm not going to throw it for you.
I want you to give yourself up.
So I can live a long and fruitful life?
Oh, we can work something out.
Fuck you. Frank, don't fucking lie to me. I have a rendezvous with death. Oh, and so does the president. And so do you, Frank, if you get too close to me.
You have a rendezvous with my ass, motherfucker.
Frank, do you know how easily I could kill you, Frank? Do you know how many times I've watched you go in and out of that apartment? You're alive because I have allowed you to live. So you show me some goddamn respect!
I mean, and then of course the incredibly fraught scene where Malkovich sticks the gun in his mouth, while they're on the edge of the roof. It never goes into full on, really kind of terrible, homophobia kind of thing. But there is that slight element that, I mean, some of that is just the way Malkovich talks anyway. But I think that contrast, the contrast in voices and the contrast in everything those actors represent clashing. I mean, what perfect casting. I mean, I can't imagine anyone else doing these two parts.
Yeah, apparently they were considering De Niro.
For Mitch.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
They were thinking of the De Niro of like, I don't know. I mean,
what's the Scorsese movie where he's like
Goodfellas or something?
No. Oh yeah, God, what's the Scorsese? All of them.
Yeah.
Sorry, the one where he's like, it's a home invasion movie.
Cape Fear.
Fear, like a Cape Fear. But yeah, no, I can't imagine it either.
He's too overtly menacing.
Mm-hmm.
The one person that maybe could have done it back in the day, at this point, but Donald Sutherland.
Oh, that's interesting.
Who was like the first John Malkovich,
right.
Young Donald Sutherland could have done something like this.
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, he also had a very distinctive voice. But yeah, no, I mean, like, I don't know. The 70s version of this movie would have been like Donald Sutherland versus George C. Scott or something like that.
Yeah.
I do love that, like the different styles coming together, because it feels like I was looking at quotes and you see like Mitch says something really poetic and articulate, and then Frank's line is he's almost basically like, I know you are, but what am I? Or, he's like I'm gonna piss on your grave.
His responses develop, right? Because at first he's just completely broken, and then later on he's just like,
I'm really pissed.
Well, he's just like, you've got an appointment with my ass, motherfucker. Which is a sign that he's broken, right?
Yeah.
But and eventually he has to kind of come to some equilibrium with Mitch, and that's when he knows he can kind of move forward.
Yeah, that's right.
And finally he's able to just completely ignore him.
Yes, exactly. Which is ultimately what you need for what these characters need.
I love all the Mitch stuff though. Like one of my favorite parts of the movie is just when we just watch Mitch go around doing his thing, and the poor lady from Minneapolis has to die. She's so menacing, when he just closes the door and says, "I'm sorry, I can't let you ladies leave." Oh my gosh. But that's what I mean when I could watch a whole Mitch movie.
He's so unpredictable. I mean, that's the thing. Even though we know, I mean, look, he shows up at their house and we know what's going to happen.
Yep.
And yet how he does it, the way he moves, everything about him is so unpredictable.
Yeah.
I mean, what a gift to have an actor who can do things like that in, in some ways, a very predictable action movie. We don't have a lot of actors who can pull that kind of thing. I mean, I feel like today, Colin Farrell sometimes can pull something like that. Sometimes you'll see him in just like the worst movie, and he is able to just do things that surprise you. But even that the scene where he kills the two hunters,
it's so
like,
sudden.
Why did you shoot that bird, asshole? Like you're not expecting that line. I mean, that's
No.
scripted, obviously, but you're not expecting that line, and the way he does it, just so casually, and then just blows him away. I mean, that's.
I feel like he does a little sigh. He like looks down at his gun. He's like,
yeah, exactly. Every single moment Malkovich is on screen,
It's incredible.
or he's doing something that you're just not expecting.
It is incredible.
And sometimes it's very subtle, but it's just so well done.
It's really, really good. The other thing I just wanted to mention, we watched this little featurette. There were a number of composited, like computer graphically composited scenes that were really, really good. Like when we saw it the first time, we didn't notice.
I just thought they hired a whole lot of extras.
And so a couple of them are like when they're doing when they're doing one of the motorcades, and the crowds on either side of the road are digitally, those are digitally composited. So they like filmed different crowds and they took the same group of people and filmed them in different places and then added them all together, stitched them all together. And we knew that, and then we watched it this time, couldn't even tell. I could not tell like where's the stitch or whatever. It's perfect. The other one that's a little bit more noticeable, I suppose, is when they composite in Frank and the president and stuff into like the Bill Clinton rallies. Those, although I didn't see them the first time, but after it was pointed out, you could definitely see that it's like, he's on a green screen or whatever, but still really incredible for 93. I mean, I guess Forrest Gump is coming. So 90,
Forrest Gump is coming. Jurassic Park comes out same year. But I actually remember this at the time. Like I remember reading like a Premiere magazine spread about it, and they showed like the pictures and the before and afters and stuff. And it was very impressive. And this was the first time, because remember, at this point, like we're in the age of like morphing. Like that's when morphing became a word, right? You had like the Michael Jackson's Black or White video. You had The Abyss. You had Terminator 2. So we've understood that like computers can do amazing things, but they've all been with these high profile effects shots.
Yeah, it's
right?
like really noticeable.
Right. It's like it's a giant water tentacle, right? Or this this cop is going to turn into liquid metal, or there are fucking dinosaurs. Like all the effects that we're hearing about are just like these incredible, you've never seen anything like this kind of stuff. And this was the first time I saw that like, oh, they can use computers to do this. They can use computers to like create a crowd. And that was the first time I saw that. And that's when I think it kind of dawned on a lot of us that like, oh, right, this stuff is going to change everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like this isn't just going to be like for the big effect shot that they're going to do this, like they'll do that. But actually, this is perhaps even more revolutionary. And I mean, it's actually, there are way more effects shots in this movie than one realized. Like that elevator scene at the end, like that's all blue screen apparently.
Oh, cool. Wow.
But I mean, this is, Wolfgang Petersen is actually really good about this stuff. Like before that, we see that elevator during the daytime when Malkovich and that big party guy are riding it together. And that's the real elevator. That's an actual elevator. They shot it, their daytime. So we get that space, we get that sort of embeds itself into our brain so that the next time we see it, when it is an effects shot, like our brain kind of completes the picture.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the sign of a filmmaker kind of knows exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, that's right. They know almost the limitation of what you're working with. So you have to show them something real before you're going to take do the fake thing, because that's really, really,
and that's what Spielberg, like that's why Spielberg is so good at it too, because in Jurassic Park, like he mixes in practical real effects, tactile things, and then he'll cut to the CGI, and you're just you go with it.
I long for those days, because I really, really need more practical stuff. I find the CGI stuff.
You think everything should be puppets?
I wanted to be puppets. I actually, Bilge, I'm going to confess this. I did love Life of Pi, but when I saw the trailer, I was like, why didn't they just make it a puppet? But I once I saw it, I was like, okay, actually, no, it's great. But I kind of was hoping for a little animatronic tiger.
I love Life of Pi too, but there's something about Life of I feel like Life of Pi is like there's now like an original sin moment to Life of Pi for me, just because I think that's the moment when Ang Lee kind of loses his mind over what technology can accomplish and just completely loses his bearings as a filmmaker. I don't know, maybe that's going too far, but but you know, because after that he goes whole hog on this like, you know, high frame rate nonsense that drives me crazy. But yeah, like I look at Life, a great movie, incredible effects. And I look at that and I'm like, oh man, this is where it all went wrong.
That's the turn. That's the wrong turn.
Meanwhile, Jess and I are like, more Gemini Man.
I kind of dug Gemini Man. I mean, seeing it in high frame rate was a kind of weird, religious experience.
Well, I told you, I wrote a thing about this at the time. You know, I saw Gemini Man twice. Because I saw it with my son, and we saw it actually just regular, 24 frame per second version. And then later on, I went to see the high frame rate. And what's funny, because this was after the film had come out, and it had, these terrible reviews. And the first time I saw it, I was like, it's actually a pretty good movie. I actually enjoy it. I mean, I didn't love it. I think it's got problems, but I was like, yeah, mostly works. And then I saw it in high frame rate. And I'm like, oh, right, that's why it doesn't work. Like it just completely. Yeah, I'm not a high frame rate fan. I had a similar reverse experience with Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, because I went to the premiere where they did the whole thing, and I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. End this now, please stop. and then later on, I went to like a press screening they had of just like the regular 24 frame per second version, and I was like, oh, right, there's a reason why movies should be 24 frame per second if people are going to act like they're in a movie, but that's a whole other conversation.
That's a whole other conversation. Bilge, thank you so much for being here. Are there any last words on In the Line of Fire that you want to say?
I mean, I have a rant that I could do, but
do you want to do your gender rant?
Do it. Yeah.
Let's hear it. I didn't know you didn't jump in, so I wasn't sure if you wanted
to. I mean, he's old. He's also mean. He's really mean, and I don't like it. I really wish the whole Rene Russo part was not a part of this movie. It drives me bonkers. That's all. I said, ugh, so many times during this movie.
So, Bilge, maybe you can shed light on this really quickly. So we were wondering, why is it that they need to have a love interest for him? And my suspicion was that at the time, if a guy had like a failed relationship in the past, that character arc wasn't complete unless he like had a new relationship. But because Laura pointed out that like, well, he could have just been like, maybe I'm going to retire from being basically being a Secret Service guy and play piano. Like that's a passion you could pursue.
Reconnect with the family that he does have.
Exactly.
He's got a daughter somewhere.
There were other ways you could have done this.
Definitely Lily's age.
But was it something about the time that like it, we felt like it wasn't a complete arc until the love interest was fulfilled?
I mean, it's conventions. At that point, that's just a convention. I don't think there was anything particular about the time that he had to have a love interest. I think it was just movies had romances in them, no matter what the hell the plot. Even if it was a movie about Secret Service agents trying to stop somebody from killing the president, there had to be a romance. It's weird because it's like somehow dated, but it's also like it hits harder than it did back then. Like back then, his pig-headedness. His pig-headedness about the stuff was like, oh yeah, he's ancient, he's a dinosaur, and now he's just like, oh fuck that guy.
Yeah.
Which in some ways, I don't know. I mean, it's like it's weirdly, it brings him down even lower, so that when he does rise to the occasion, it feels that much more. But yeah, it's obviously dated. At the same time, she's an interesting character. Like I like her a lot. I mean, she's great.
I like her so much that I think she shouldn't be with him because I'm like, or at least like not at the point that she gets with him. That's what drives me crazy is that he thinks she calls her a secretary. He calls her window dressing. He like makes comments about her body, where she keeps her gun. He's consistently demeaning and awful to her. And what's the moment she decides to have sex with him? He tells her a story about how he hung out with Nixon. like that's not like what?
Yeah,
he's not. It's not the moment where he cries about how he's haunted by the JFK assassination. He's just doing his Frank thing, winking a lot. He winks a lot. Has winking ever been cool? Because it just makes me feel squidgy. I don't want anyone to ever wink at me.
Laura's not holding back.
I think winking. Speaking of someone who I don't think has ever like, I couldn't physically wink, if I remember correctly, until like embarrassingly late in my life. I just couldn't do it. But yeah, I think winking was considered cool until like women were allowed to like have opinions, and they pointed out that no, actually, it's not cool at all.
My friend had a boyfriend in college who was a winker, and she like warned us ahead of time. She's like, he's really nice. He is a winker, though, and we were like, oh no. They got married. It's all fine, but I think he may continue to wink.
Winkers.
PSA.
I mean, yeah, I think winking is probably more fraught nowadays than it was. Like once upon a time, winking I think maybe was thought of the same way like finger guns.
Yeah,
it was just the thing you did.
Yeah,
and now it's kind of like, ugh.
Yeah, well, he says it like it's in the context of like she's like, oh, I'm not a secretary, I'm an agent, and he goes, I know that. I was just seeing if she had a sense of humor. Wink.
Right. I mean, but I mean, he is clearly flirting with her. And you can dislike that because of the age difference and whatever, but the authority difference and whatever. But I think it's a little bit unfair to criticize the movie for the way in which he does it, insofar as that is part and parcel of like the time, and also the part and parcel of what time the character is coming from, which is the 60s, right? Like he's in his like relationship prime, presumably in the 50s and 60s. So that's between 20 and 30. And so those are going to be the social.
It's when winking was cool.
Yeah, yes. I mean, and so in a way, it's part of the.
Fonz did a lot of winking, didn't he? Now that I'm thinking about it.
I don't know. But anyway,
he did this. The Fonz did the.
Oh,
he did the thumbs up.
Okay, I thought he might have also winked.
Yeah, I don't think of the winking was seen as. I mean, here I am talking like I know anything about it. I don't. I think. I mean, my authority on these matters is. I mean, I was still a virgin when this movie came out. Like, it's not, but I do think that like winking was definitely seen as something more rakish, not like the Fonz was not rakish. He was cool.
Right. Good point. Yeah. I think I struggle with an archetype, which is a very common film one where men are awful to women and neg them, and then they find that terribly attractive. But I do think it's not just that with this movie. I agree with you, Justin, that she has a lot of autonomy and it's her choice.
She pushes back on him.
She pushes back and then and she sees through to his nuggety center and chooses to be with him. But I don't know why in that moment when he tells the Nixon story, that's the moment.
Good
for her.
Yeah,
I was and watching it again, I was surprised because I mean I feel like I know this movie backwards and forwards. I could probably quote it verbatim. I was like, that's the moment where they hook up. Like I was this time, I was kind of like, interesting. I keep forgetting because that doesn't quite make sense. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's like they're set up to get together. It's fine. We know they're going to get together. But like that's the moment when it happens, it doesn't quite make sense. And you almost wonder if there was like another beat that was just like cut out of the movie or something. It doesn't that doesn't quite work. I mean, it just cuts to them like taking their clothes off.
Yeah. It's almost like she's like, Nixon stories make me really hot. But I think I just also want like a little bit more reckoning for his bad behavior, not just with her, but with Al, because
Sure.
Dylan McDermott dies in this movie because of him, because he calls him a wuss for crying, basically, and says something about cockamamie and doesn't let him quit the Secret Service when he wants to. And like, that's on his hands. And like, we know he says something like, I have to go out there because he killed my partner, but there's no real reckoning for the fact, there's no reflection on that. The movie's moving too fast at that point. It's a very tight movie in that way. So I get that, but I wanted a little bit more from this movie in terms of having Frank have an arc and maybe say out loud that he realizes that the way he has been harmful to others.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that's important. But I do think though that, we have to respect her, as a character, her autonomy. She finds him attractive.
Whatever.
For whatever reason. And my suspicion is she's found him attractive from the beginning. And so it's kind of just like she's been resisting, but she really does find him attractive. And this is a charitable read, right? But is that she really, it's not like she doesn't find him attractive and then just like relents. I think she like does find him attractive, but she's concerned about the, getting in a relationship with a colleague and all that. And right, they're like on the road, and so like that's when these things happen, right? Like when you're away from, right? That's like what always happens.
Is that what always happens, Justin?
That's the trope, right? Like you go on the college, on like a vacation, right, on a camp.
Where are you going with this?
Yeah, what's happening? I'm looking at you like
that's the trope, right? You go on like your high,
really high pitched.
All right, come on, hold on. Let me back up.
You go to an MLA conference.
You go on your high school trip.
Okay.
And that's suddenly when everyone gets horny, and that's when all that shit goes down.
That's true. All-state choir was crazy.
All-state choir. God, back me up here. Jeez. I'm talking about high school. I'm not talking about now.
Okay.
I do. Well, I mean, I think, the thing about, I mean, I do like the idea of the two professionals getting together. Like and she's a better agent than him also. Like she's not, I mean, that's the one thing I like is she's not this agent who needs to be taught how to, like, she doesn't screw anything. Like she is incredibly competent.
She's on it. Yeah.
Right. She is on it. She is on top of this thing from the beginning. She does not mess up. And that's, I think, I mean, that's kind of cool. So you do get the sense that she has autonomy and power over what's happening. But you're right. That moment doesn't quite work. And these character grace notes of making him kind of this like ossified dinosaur make him seem even more like a dinosaur now.
Yeah.
I think the mitigating factor is he is Clint Eastwood and he does look amazing.
That's the thing. So that's what I kept telling Laura. I was like, just pretend.
She may not agree.
I know. Laura does not agree, but I was telling Laura, I said, pretend it's Tom Cruise.
Well, in that case.
There you go. So just pretend it's Tom Cruise and you can understand why he can get away with this stuff.
I think there's also a thing about Clint Eastwood, which is that, like, I think guys think of him as, I mean, we all kind of secretly want Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
So to us, he is like not just paragon of masculinity, but also a paragon of male beauty in a weird way that like appeals to men. So I think of Clint Eastwood as just being incredibly, like, devastatingly handsome.
Oh.
And I don't know that most of the women I know agree with me on that. I'm just like, wait, isn't he dreamy?
It's like a cranky old raisin.
They're like, he's like
and he
like
winks.
Uncle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I think that makes sense. I mean, okay. So I'm glad you got that in there, Laura. I wasn't sure if you were going to go all in on the
I want to be positive. I don't want to yuck people's yum, but I did not like
Laura had a couple issues with that part, but
those are fair issues.
But Renee Russo, great casting, and she's great, and she definitely holds her own, and she calls him out every time he says something sexist. She just basically calls him out on it, and which is great. And I think that shows like there's not some weird like he's manipulating her, which would be really uncomfortable and icky. Rather, it's a mutual attraction, and so that's a good thing.
And he's, I mean, she keeps him on his toes too, because when he says, when he says that line, I knew that, I was just checking to see if she has a sense of humor. You don't get the sense that he did know that and was checking to see if she had that's just his comeback, because I mean, I think that's good writing. Actually, I think that strikes me as, oh, that's him trying to cover his ass,
try to save some face. I think on that note, Clint Eastwood, fun actor, fun director. We're excited for Cry Macho, which I might have to drag Laura to. But speaking of Clint Eastwood confronting masculinity, I mean, that's going to be
Cry Macho.
Yeah.
I mean, that could have been the title of In the Line of Fire.
Yeah.
Cry Macho.
Yeah.
Literally.
Totally.
It's the only time the macho Clint cries. So I better see some crying.
I know. Bilge, thanks so much for being here with us. And thanks for suggesting In the Line of Fire, because that was actually a movie we had not seen before you mentioned it, and so it was really fun to watch it and then rewatch it and get into it. And I think we're gonna have to go do some Petersen dives, because we're big fans of Perfect Storm, but there's quite a bit. I mean, Das Boot. No, I haven't seen it.
Great movie. Troy, have you seen Troy?
I have a long time ago, but I have not revisited it.
I love Troy. I rewatched it recently,
Okay.
and Yeah, I mean, that film was I think moderate hit when it came out, but wasn't all that well liked, and I think it holds up beautifully.
Alexander's the Oliver Stone one, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That he has like 5 different cuts of. None of them are actually good, but
Okay.
they're interesting. You know,
Mm.
it's kind of Oliver Stone is on the psychological downslope. so he's still an interesting director, but like he's kind of lost the thing that allowed him to actually make like great films.
I see.
So there's like moments that are interesting, but then there are other moments where you're just like, oh my God, what happened here?
No.
You know?
Oh, no. Okay. Good to know, because for a particular film viewer, a casual film viewer, they might be like, Alexander Troy, what, you know, take it or leave it. A little bit like The Illusionist, The Prestige. You're just like, I don't know, 2 magic movies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw The Illusionist when it came out instead of The Prestige because I like Ed Norton. I didn't know.
So there we go.
Illusionist, I mean, it was a hit. I think it might have even been a bigger hit than The Prestige. Is that possible?
I think so, yeah.
I was not.
People
I was
did
not
not
a
know
fan
what
of
was
that
up.
film. I was
No,
not
it
a
was-
fan of that film.
It was not particularly good.
Magician movies tend to not be good. Prestige is kind of like the only one.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're you've come around on The Prestige, right?
Did you know that movie is about making movies?
We're going to end this. We're ending this right here. We're not opening up this can of worms. All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We are at CowsPod on Twitter. You can find us on the web at cowspod.wordpress.com. And next time, we'll be talking about Punch Drunk Love with Sean Burke. So see you then.